Welcome to the channel guys, and to those return viewers, welcome back. Today we're continuing our deep dive into who really is the worst Primarch. For those who haven't seen part 1, do yourself a favour and check it out. I'll leave a link in the description of this video. Maybe you're new to the hobby and are actually wondering if there's more to these 18 squabbling siblings than just the occasional xenocide or attempted patricide. By the conclusion of this 4-part series, we'll be comparing all 18 Primarch scores from each of the videos to once and for all end the debate on who really is the worst Primarch. Good times were had last video as we covered Lorgar, Sanguinius, Alfarius and Omegon, as well as Leman Russ. Today, we will discuss 5 Primarchs and consider their respective issues. To aid us in considering the worth of each Primarch, we are using 3 criteria to provide as objective scoring as possible. I'll provide a recap now on the details of each criteria. However, for those who have already listened to our first video, if you're not into hearing this bit again, just check the chapters and skip ahead to our first Primarch, Magnus the Red. Now, just be aware, we are using canon examples to justify the score for each Primarch to be as objective as possible. We don't want to play favourites with these siblings. Last time that happened, the whole galaxy nearly went to hell. Our first criteria of measure is in regards to a Primarch's achievements. These could be relating to military operations where humanity's history was rewritten in the crucible of battle, or peaceful agendas in an age soaked in blood. Some Primarchs even planned beyond the military purpose of their legions, and put themselves to work assisting humanity and bettering themselves when not campaigning. I believe these are all important considerations when assessing the achievements of a Primarch. One major factor we must also bear in mind is that considering fully half the 18 Primarchs turned to chaos, measuring these individuals' success against purely imperial ideologies and achievements would automatically place them all on the lowest 9 ranks. For this reason, we must keep an open mind and perhaps extend our criteria to more general characteristics and achievements, so as to keep the playing field level. For example, terrible achievements can still be great in their magnitude. Secondly, the negative events a Primarch brought about through brash mistakes, an imperfect temperament at odds with the perfection of their gene crafting, or some other circumstance. It is easy to judge these actions retrospectively, as we must keep in mind the Primarchs wielded great power and were not perfect. A misjudgment or miscalculation could have severe repercussions when commanding the military force of thousands of elite military personnel and voidcraft. As most 40k lore addicts are aware though, there are quite the number of tragic and unfortunate events to choose from. As we noted earlier in the video, if we were to judge the traitor Primarchs on such a basis, they would all receive the lowest mark possible, as their dedicated actions would bring much suffering and death to the galaxy. In their case, we can assess the issues they caused whether purposefully or unwittingly during their time as loyalists, rather than once they threw their lot in with the Dark Pantheon. Lastly, we'll consider a Primarch's character and personality, and how at times these attributes affected those they were associated with, such as their brothers, legionary sons, or the Imperium in general. We can to a degree lean on the wisdom of our ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle. His teachings on what is a good person outline 4 main core traits. Aristotle states the 4 cardinal virtues to define a good person are wisdom, temperance, justice, though not the Nostraman kind, and finally, fortitude. Clearly, the 18 Primarchs are not mere mortals, and so their frame of mind and the general grand scale of their plans and foresight is not able to be understood easily, though we can still do our best in trying. Magnus the Red. A more studious and inquisitive brother among the 18 there was not. In a grim future of hidden secrets and lost lore, where knowledge is power, Magnus the Red and his legion of the 1,000 Sons were capable indeed. Regrettably for this legion and its Primarch, their capacity to wield forces on a scale unlike any other Astartes also came with an unfortunate disposition in relying on their own counsel rather than heeding the advice of their peers. It would be a mistake to claim that a legion's want to improve their strength and efficiency at arms was not a path to improving humanity's lot in the wider Imperium. After all, The more powerful a legion is, the more worlds and lost human cultures they bring into the fold of the burgeoning imperium. And regarding the Thousand Sons particularly, the more lost lore they are capable of rediscovering. When considering Magnus' quest for knowledge and power, however, one must consider his deeper motivations. The Thousand Sons were unique amongst the legions in the way so many of their number exhibited psychic potential, this genetic mutation having a major influence on the personality of their number compared to a legion lacking this ability in such a widespread manifestation. Within the minds and hearts of the powerful, what they possess is often never enough, over time prioritizing the acquisition of more power and knowledge to the detriment of other facets of their personality as well as their purpose. This ever-increasing insistence on expanding the volume of their arcane knowledge would develop into a seemingly arrogant and at times detached attitude by these legionaries, as matters that should be important at the core of any legion were often overlooked, such as their primary mission to unify humanity across the Milky Way galaxy, or their consideration for the well-being of the members of the species they once belonged to. Though Magnus would be warned of the risk this folly of diving into forbidden lore could bring about, the hubris of one who believes they know better would ensure his legion's psychic strength would count for naught when it was time for a greater mind than his own to usurp Magnus and his son's ability and strength for themselves. Unfortunately, for the powerful adepts of the Thousand Sons, there are not a great many selfless tales of heroism or compliance chalked up to this legion and their father. Though the depositories of knowledge available to the Thousand Sons and stored on Tisca were vast, I could not find a single tale online or recall it from my readings of the Horus Heresy novels wherein this knowledge was shared with and used by the greater Imperium to aid humanity. Now, I may be incorrect in this, so I'm very open to anybody aiding myself and the wider community in the comment section of this video. Please enlighten me if your opinion is contrary to this and you have the canonical examples to prove them, as at this point it seems Magnus' gathering of lore was more a selfish hoarding of knowledge rather than a dawn of discovery to enlighten the species he was created to protect. On the subject of Tisca, Magnus did create in that city a jewel of civilization that housed all the accumulated knowledge that he and his legion had chronicled during their years crusading through the Milky Way galaxy. I can personally say that through my own reading of the novels and the inspiring art created by the 40k community, Tisca, known as the City of Light, conjures thoughts of ancient Greek Acropolis and forums, but with a notable Egyptian influence, given the various descriptions of glass pyramids that existed throughout Tisca. In my mind's eye, I imagine an architecture such as that found within Alexandria during the Ptolemaic era, as well as ancient Athens, polished with a futuristic, almost alien oasis veneer that no doubt elevated this township to the wonder it was throughout the galaxy in the setting we all know and love. In keeping with the ancient Greek inspiration, legionaries of the Thousand Sons would often philosophize and debate treaties publicly within Tisca, much akin to our own ancient philosophers such as Plato and Socrates within the Lyceum of ancient Athens. Truly, Magnus built a civilization worthy of wonder and regard throughout the known galaxy. We can also see that Magnus encouraged his sons to adopt a more philosophical and reasoned approach to life and its challenges, rather than a purely martial aspect of existence. Knowing all of this very much amplifies the tragedy surrounding the burning of Prospero, Tisca's great libraries of knowledge and cultural identity, burnt down by the savage wolves. On our scale, I believe Magnus should be attributed a 2 in regards to achievements. Though the repositories of knowledge the Thousand Sons were said to have possessed were vast indeed, there does not seem to be a documented instance of this knowledge being put to good use to aid humanity as a species in either its struggle to reunite its lost empire throughout the Milky Way galaxy or to improve its quality of life. We must consider though that on his own world of Prospero, Magnus was triumphant in creating not only a jewel of a city, but creating and propagating a culture of higher learning and consideration. Perhaps the greatest mistake Magnus would ever make, and I know you know where I'm going with this, was to ignore the advice and indeed the command of a more accomplished psyker than himself in his father, the Emperor of mankind. After the Emperor's final ruling at the conclave held at Nicaea, which favoured the discontinuation of sorcerous practices within the Space Marine legions, Magnus would again not adhere to the counsel of others and would continue in secret his legion's forbidden practices. When warp-fueled abilities allowed Magnus to foresee Horus' betrayal and plans to usurp power from the Emperor, Magnus would sacrifice the lives of many thralls to project his consciousness through the ether into the Imperial Palace on Terra to warn his father. In a gross display of ignorance, Magnus would accept power from an entity within the warp unknown to him, which gifted him the psychic strength to tear through the Emperor's defences within the warp in order to deliver his message. In his ignorance, Magnus did not realise this golden latticework of defences shielded the palace and indeed Terra itself from the countless demonic legions ready to bring battle to the anathema on his home turf. He did this because he did not understand the complexity of the phenomena he wielded, which in turn allowed Magnus to be manipulated by Tzeentch itself and used as a tool to not only set back but ultimately undo his father's master plan for humanity in the process. To undo the Emperor of Mankind's plan for the advancement of the human species is quite the feat, especially so considering it was achieved through an act of ignorance committed by his own son, rather than a concerted assault by his greatest enemies. The Chaos God of manipulation and trickery truly outdid himself on this occasion. To claim that Magnus did nothing wrong is lunacy equal to Magnus' own folly. Magnus, distraught in having displeased his father so, would fall into a pool of regret and self-loathing, though this change in attitude would see Magnus atone for his sins in a way that only further drove himself and his legion from the Emperor's light. When Horus would manipulate Leman Russ and his Space Wolves into destroying the Thousand Sons rather than apprehending them as the Emperor had wished, Magnus would again make extremely poor decisions in sending away his defensive resources and robbing Prospero of its ability to defend itself, so as to welcome this retribution as a final punishment for their own ignorance and misdeeds. Not only would this lead to the slaughter of innocent citizenry and his legion's sons, it would provide the staging of a final conflict between the Thousand Sons and other loyalist imperial elements, where the only option for survival for the Thousand Sons was to forsake their oaths of loyalty and turn on their cousins and allies, becoming instruments in the machinations of Horus and his dark masters. While some debate could be made in Magnus' defense, to the effect he was heavily ostracized from the brotherhood of other Primarchs and mistrusted due to his psychic nature, ultimately his successive misjudgments were his own, and his hand was never forced in making the errors leading up to the burning of Prospero and subsequent bargain with Tzeentch. It is a stark contrast to the likes of fellow traitor Primarchs such as Angron, whose implanting with the butcher's nails and slaughtering of his family on New Syria influenced his betrayal, or Fulgrim, whose willpower was slowly overcome by the demonic Leah Blade. For Magnus himself to believe his power and knowledge to be so great is a mistake of such immense magnitude that it is at odds with the wisdom one would normally associate with such a well-learned individual. Perhaps Magnus had the potential to undo or at least make amends for his past mistakes when the Imperial Task Force arrived at Prospero, in that he could have tried to convey Horus' betrayal. However, Magnus would allow his own self-pity to take precedence, resulting in the destruction of his legion and home world. Considering Magnus did all of this of his own volition, along with the negative impact Magnus had on the Emperor's plan for humanity, leads me to rate the negative aspects of Magnus the lowest possible score, which is a 1. A true tragedy regarding Magnus is that despite his arrogance, he does mean well. Most of the time. When he bumbles through the Emperor's warp defences shielding Terra, his ignorance is peaking just as high as his arrogance when bargaining with an unknown warp entity. Magnus did this to warn the Emperor of Horus' betrayal though, which is something we must bear in mind. I also do wonder if perhaps by utilising his psychic abilities to warn his father, whether this was some form of justification Magnus would plan to use for the argument of reinstating his legion's psychic talents, thus striking out the Edict of Nicaea in a way that would substantiate Magnus' previous claims. Unlike some Primarchs, such as Dawn or Sanguinius, when Magnus learnt of Horus' betrayal, he didn't almost kill the messenger or refuse to consider the truth of the thing in a fit of rage, but instead demonstrated his logical and cool-headed traits, seeking to act promptly for the sake of the greater Imperium. It was the manner in which he chose to communicate this news that led to successive events of great strife and bloodshed. The unfortunate events and decisions that compile Magnus' fall are due in no small degree to a healthy dose of arrogance, though in summary, this giant of a Primarch fought to stay loyal in the face of his brother Primarch's disdain of his nature, the judgment at Nicaea, and the censure of the Emperor through the dispatch of Rust's legion. Given Magnus did not actively seek to betray the Emperor or easily capitulate to honeyed words from traitors, paired with the fact he does generally mean well, I believe earns Magnus a score of 2 for his character and personality. This provides Magnus with a grand total of 5, a score equal to Leman Russ. When it comes to Magnus, you either love him or you don't. Let us know in the comments if you feel his tally reflects the events throughout the Horus Heresy novels. I'm really interested to know your opinion. Ferrus Manus. Victim of poor writing, or a headstrong and boisterous being whose time was literally cut short before the Warhammer fanbase could get to know him on a more personable level. Brogel Dawn to Kirill Sinderman during the Siege of Terra. It was unthinkable. We believed we could not be killed until Ferrus fell. Ferrus Manus was a firm believer in ensuring those upon his world were given the chance to succeed. However, they were expected to hold their own against the predations of their planet's warring clans. In this way, his planet's people were gifted the ability to make of themselves what they would. However, if this opportunity was squandered or his people grew complacent, the next in line would take power and continue this tradition in earnest, ever expecting more from those around him, stoking their will to succeed and their bravery to great heights. Ferrus Manus was a true hero who would lead his people and his legion from the front, never asking of them what he himself would not prove could be done. A hard man with an iron exterior, as you would expect of one with the epithet of Gorgon, but a true and deep love for those he cared about. We see this expression of love and compassion no more so than in the relationship between Ferrus and his brother Fulgrim, as unlikely a duo as one could imagine, though perhaps fitting for a sci-fi setting full of such ironies. As with all the Primarchs, the greater volume of more detailed lore surrounding their personalities and individual experiences was not explored until the Black Library set out to publish the history of the Horus Heresy in novel form. Considering the publisher's task at hand in building up and then detailing the wars of the heresy, there is comparatively little detail and official lore available to understand the campaigns and undertakings of the legions prior to that dark era. As such, when it comes to Ferrus Manus, perhaps the least fleshed out Primarchs of them all, there is a lack of source material available to greatly detail his contributions to humanity at large, but we'll do our best. What is known of this stoic individual is his brother Roboute Guilliman, as reputable Primarch as they could be, did count Ferrus among his dauntless few, along with the likes of Sanguinius, Dawn, and Leman Russ. Given Roboute's consistent casting of theoretical scenarios, he proposed that along with his Ultramarines, any one or more of these legions and Primarch could hold their own against any foe. A stark realization of the effectiveness of the Iron Hands, Blood Angels, Imperial Fists, or Space Wolf legions. Perhaps one of the greatest snippets of lore that convey the persona and driving force for humanity that Ferrus embodied was the fact he, among the likes of Horus, Sanguinius, and the Lion, were thought to be the short list of considerations for the much coveted rank of War Master, a title we know was fatefully passed to Horus. We can consider that one of the prime reasons Ferrus Manus was not successful in gaining this role was the vast wells of anger and violence bubbling just underneath his cold and logical exterior. For the War Master of all the Imperium's crusade fleets to lose their head at a pivotal time would result in great detriment to a young, burgeoning Imperium, a risk the Emperor of Mankind could likely see and a character flaw which saw Ferrus ultimately perish in the flames of betrayal during the drop site massacre. It is also said that the Iron Hands achieved much glory during the Great Crusade. A likely contributing factor for this is that Ferrus Manus was the third of 18 known Primarchs to be rediscovered by the Emperor, and so had the opportunity to learn much from his gifted brother Horus and his father. Whilst we are indeed short on particular canonical events to aid our scoring, we can utilise facts such as Roboute's willingness to vouch for his ability, which can only be based on actual triumphs belonging to Ferrus, as well as the general opinion that Ferrus would make a fitting Imperial War Master to help in the decision-making process. Regarding achievements, we will award Ferrus a 2. I do not believe 3 is justifiable given the contributions we know of. However, reflecting upon our previous examples, and the fact Iron Hands under Ferrus' leadership were said to be an extremely effective force, a rating of 1 seems unfair also. Speaking of the rage bubbling underneath Ferrus' practiced self-control, this personality trait would ultimately lead to Ferrus' death on the fields of Isfane 5, wherein the Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard are caught between a far numerically superior force of their erstwhile brothers. I do feel Ferrus' act of charging headlong at Fulgrim, along with his valuable Morlock assets, was a needless expenditure of life and resources, and equated to a suicide charge. Even in the event Ferrus overcame Fulgrim in personal combat, his own strength and that of his legion would have been greatly depleted in doing so, thus preventing them from being put to greater use in performing a breakout from the traitor ambush alongside the Salamanders and Raven Guard. Though the Loyalists in this scenario were sorely devoid of suitable options, surely a concerted breakout between all 3 Loyalist legions would have been a better option rather than expending one's own life in a fateful last charge. As we have already said, we do not have as much source material to draw conclusions from pertaining to Ferrus Manus across at least 2 of our 3 criteria, his detrimental traits and actions being 1. For this reason, we will award Ferrus a 2 on our scale. I believe that given his past contributions to the Imperium's wider war efforts and the fact he was a likely candidate among his brothers for War Master, should be considered firm counters to his negative actions during Isfane 5. For this reason, we will again award Ferrus a 2, though it is the score I am so far least sure about between the first video and this one. Interestingly enough, the Primarch Ferrus Manus was not an advocate for his Gene Son's use of bionic enhancements, believing they should rely more so on their own strength of body and purpose. He is even recorded as vowing to rid his legion of this mindset once the Great Crusade drew to a close, wanting to lead by example first and strip his own arms of the necrodermis which coated them. As we know though, Ferrus would fall during the war on Isfane 5, and so this perspective and doctrine would never be erased within his legion. Ferrus wanted more than ever for his legion to live on past the Great Crusade and into a bright future where their own learned self-reliance and inner strength would see them as continued champions of humanity. This surprisingly touching side of Ferrus, paired with the positive relationship he forged with his brother Fulgrim, give us a much needed, deeper insight into his character and personality. When referencing the traits of wisdom, temperance, justice, and fortitude, we can see the majority of these displayed within Ferrus from the little we managed to glean of him. However, his temperance, a trait he had worked hard on reining in over the decades, would see the better of him and ultimately lead him to his own demise. Given these reasons, we will again award Ferrus a 2 for character and personality. This takes Ferrus to a total of 6. Thankfully not at the bottom of the list, and fairly in line with his brothers. I want to take a quick opportunity to say thank you to all those who liked, commented and subscribed on the back of our first Primarch video. Thanks so much guys. We are well on our way to reaching our 1000 sub target. Once a channel hits this milestone, businesses do tend to take you more seriously, granting you affiliate status, sponsorships, giveaways for your subscribers and the like. These are all things we really want to achieve, so if you do like the content, please consider subbing, liking and leaving a comment. It doesn't cost you anything and it really helps the channel. Mortarion. Lord of disease and decay, though it was not always so. Having liberated the planet he landed on, like many of his brother Primarchs, the people of Barbarous were eternally in his debt, having been freed from the tyranny of their sorcerous Xenos overlords. Reunited with his legion, they would cut a swathe of liberated systems throughout the stars. They would bring a host of lost human civilizations back under the sway of terror and eliminate any who dared doubt the Imperial truth. Mortarion and his legion were especially passionate regarding the extermination of sorcerers and magic users, given the horrors he and his people endured on Barbarous under the horror magics of the Xenos overlords of that planet. We see this contempt in Mortarion's passionate plea during the Council of Nicaea, which turned a lot of hearts and minds against the use of warp-fueled power throughout the Imperium. This outcome led to the disbanding of the Librarius throughout the Astartes legions. This would play to the traitors' cause in the coming heresy, when the majority of traitor legions had no issue with the use of warp magics, and the loyalists would not have a suitable counter, other than the rune priests of the Space Wolves. It was noted by Imperial scholars and remembrances both that the Death Guard Legion would throw themselves into the Great Crusade with considerable momentum and force of will. Mortarion and his Astartes would bring fire and death to the Imperium's foe no matter where they resided. Toxic Xenos environs meant nothing to the hardy Marines of the Death Guard. In regards to achievements, there really is only one both prior to and during the heresy which stands out to me. This is Mortarion's impassioned plea to both his brother Primarchs and the assembled Imperial dignitaries on Nicaea to be away with the various legions Librarius. Mortarion would speak from the heart during this speech, having experienced firsthand the warping powers a dark sorcerer could lay down. As we have touched on at length already, this would leave the Imperial defenders hesitant to utilise their Librarius until the very late stages of the Heresy Wars. Considering this really is the most substantial feat we see Mortarion play a significant part in, besides the spray and slay when crusading across the galaxy in the name of the Imperium, we will assign Mortarion a rating of 1 with regards to achievements. As to negative impacts Mortarion may have unwittingly put into motion during his time as a loyal Primarch, beside the aforementioned conclave held at Nicaea, and some notable minor conflicts we learn of during the novels, disappointingly we do not learn much more detail of Mortarion and the Death Guard's exploits during the time between his discovery on Barbarous and the onset of the Horus Heresy. We will assign a 2 to Mortarion in regards to negative effects or misdeeds he had upon the wider Imperium, there being not enough recollection of events to sway the tally to either low or high scoring extremes, and considering the traitor legions were able to go unchecked in regards to the use of their warp powers during the heresy. Though passionate regarding the liberation of human colonies throughout the stars during the Great Crusade, Mortarion was forever a plain-spoken individual. If he did not trust or agree with another's actions, he would not be combative per se, but he would not hold back from voicing his opinion. We see this aspect of his character during his discussion with the Emperor soon after being reunited with him and defeating the Care, the supreme overlord of Barbarous and Mortarion's foster father, where the Emperor wants to gift Mortarion with a token or gift to mark their reunification, as well as his son's commitment to the Emperor's grand scheme in the Great Crusade. The Emperor, it seems, would gift each Primarch with a rare weapon for themselves. Mortarion refuses the Emperor's gift of a powerful relic scimitar, though sensing the Emperor's displeasure and perhaps anger, instead chooses a pistol called the Lantern, a weapon those who play 40k on the tabletop will likely be very familiar with. Mortarion, stubborn and rebellious in nature, would question his father as to why he laid low the overfiend of Barbarous, rather than allowing Mortarion to do so, given the Emperor was the one to lead him to that path of retribution. This is quite a rare dialogue, as conversations between Primarch and father are not often detailed throughout the Horus Heresy novels. This conversation is of particular interest, as a rebellious son calls out the actions of an almost manipulative father. Considering the integrity and all-round goodness of the Primarch of the Death Guard Legion, it is easy to see how his taciturn and self-reliant bearing could be regarded as indifference or a want to not form close bonds of friendship with his own brothers. Mortarion is an interesting character in the way he expects hopeful initiates of his legion and tried and true Astartes both to endure extreme pain and hardship, therefore sculpting them into more resilient Astartes. He does not do this out of anger or loathing for his gene sons, such as we see with the likes of Angron or Kurz, but to ensure the modus operandi of the Death Guard Legion lives up to the standards set by his mortal followers back on the planet Barbarous. After Mortarion had sided with Horus, we see him later turning to the Chaos God Nurgle, only begrudgingly, to save his gene sons from perpetual suffering at the hands of the Plain God's diseases wrought throughout their fleet whilst trapped in the warp. In all, Mortarion's sombre though pragmatic personality earns him a 2 on this scale. This is an overall score of 5 for Mortarion. Roboute Guilliman. The poster boy of 40k, especially in the current and up-to-date timeline, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Lord Commander of the Imperium of Man, Roboute Guilliman. He is perhaps the greatest of all Primarchs. There, I said it. Now I feel dirty. He had achieved remarkable feats before his discovery by the Emperor, during the heresy, then now again after his awakening in the tail end of the 41st millennium. It could easily be said Roboute's greatest skill lay in the establishment and continued management of complex logistics on a macro scale, as well as the statesman's art. Roboute would unite his surviving loyalist brothers after the events of the heresy to ensure the Imperium as a whole was safe and organised so that similar events would not reoccur. Prior to this, during the heresy, in an effort to ensure humanity's continued survival, Roboute, along with his brothers Sanguinius and Lionel Johnson, would found the Imperium Secundus within the realm of Ultramar. Due to the rampant warp storms which limited communication between loyalist elements throughout the galaxy, for all these three brothers knew, Terra had fallen and Horus was in a position of power, marshalling his forces for a push to eliminate any remaining loyalists. As much a pragmatist as a guardian for humanity, much of Roboute's efforts since his discovery on Macragge has been for the well-being of the species. Now that Roboute has awoken in the 41st millennium to face an imperium of archaic ideals, corruption rife within its hallowed institutions, his goal is clear, but the path to it could not be more difficult to pave. It is perhaps fortunate for the Imperium that a Primarch with a cool head is the one chosen to come to their aid at this time. One major point of difference the Ultramarines Legion possess compared to their cousin legions is the practice within their ranks of statescraft. Roboute's, and in turn the Ultramarines, influence hangs heavily over the 500 worlds. A particular rank within their legion, called Tetrarch, is even devoted to the governance of a major world within the Ultramar sector. We gain insight into the blend of professional and at times even cordial behaviour exhibited by Ultramarines legionaries when taking part in conversations with personnel or Astartes not of their legion. For these reasons, we will attribute Roboute a 3 for achievements, considering so many benefited the Imperium and humanity. Considering the taciturn, logical nature and mindset of Roboute, it is difficult to attribute his action throughout the Horus Heresy novels, or even in the newer 40k setting, as being mistakes or overly negative. When assigning a negative trait to a Primarch based on inherent personality faults or poorly considered courses of action, one cannot so simply attribute a problem such as this to Roboute. The Primarch of the Ultramarines is not the greatest logistician within the entire Imperium through exhibiting ill-considered actions or behaviour. Every course of action Roboute ever takes from his childhood on Macragge into the darkness of the 41st millennium is based on a theoretical scenario he has run 1,000 times in his own mind, ever seeking the most positive and meaningful practical course of action. For this reason, based purely on logic, Roboute has to be awarded a 3. Again, not only does Roboute Guilliman aim to provide fair and just governance for all worlds within the Imperium, He wishes for his sons the ability to take part in a life that exists outside battlescapes and constant campaign. As a son reborn from a period of secular belief into an imperium of battle churches and war hymnals, the most logical son of the Emperor of mankind struggles with how to proceed. While he is aware of how the practice of Emperor worship came about, and how it has nursed a fractured imperium through 10,000 years of constant war, the decision on whether to allow this way of living or bring about its dissolution is one that weighs heavily on his mind. Whilst these issues plague Roboute's consciousness, he also bears witness to an emperor enacting what can only be considered miracles, whilst he also seems to communicate from another plane with his followers. One must wonder, in times such as this, whether 10,000 years of worship has slowly coalesced into a being of such power and magnitude that the man who was his father may as well be considered the god of all humankind. After reflecting on a summary of Roboute's achievements and obstacles, it is a fairly safe conclusion that he does display the key virtues we discussed earlier of wisdom, temperance, justice, and fortitude. He is able to provide wise counsel to his brothers and sons, maintain a cool-headed logic and calmness in the face of traitors who spit on all Roboute believes in, fights a galaxy-spanning war for justice in the name of humanity, and bears these burdens solely, his loyal Primarch brothers all either lost or deceased. Considering these core virtues which Roboute displayed throughout the Crusade, Heresy, and the current era, it is only right to award him the highest possible score, a 3. Roboute, it seems, has earned his place among the greats such as his angelic brother, Sanguinius, both coming out of this assessment with a healthy 9. Perturabo. Let's finish today's video, part 2 of 4 installments on an especially contentious personality, Perturabo. Unknown to some of the fanbase, who believe Perturabo to be little more than a shallow character whose most defining trait was feeling sorry for himself, or whose sole purpose was to be a counter to the likes of Rogal Dawn, there is a lot more that can be said for Perturabo and his 4th Legion. Whilst I am aware it echoes Perturabo's own bitter claims of exploitation which he levelled at the wider Imperium quite consistently, you really do have to take your hat off to the efforts of Perty and the Iron Warriors during the era of the Great Crusade. Owing to their more dominant characteristics of logic and stubbornness, Perturabo and the 4th would prove exceptionally efficient at the art of siege warfare. Through the most apocalyptic of war zones, Perturabo's legion of taciturn killers would expertly dismantle the formidable defences of Xenos or renegade human civilizations, foolish enough to believe themselves safe behind walls and shield generators. On war fronts that had been reduced to nothing more than wide open killing fields and wet quagmires of mud and disease, instead of churned up earth and death, the Iron Warriors would see mathematical problems to be solved. Through expertly calculated and constructed angled trenches, pillboxes, fixed heavy weapons emplacements, tank traps, and use of their heavily armoured Tyrant Siege Terminator squads, the Iron Warriors could push up onto, as well as underneath, enemy fortifications. Within war zones that could halt an entire Crusade fleet of other Astartes for months, the Iron Warriors could be dispatched to apply their legion's doctrines and tactics, bearing the back-breaking siege warfare so as other legions could achieve glory. Or so Perturabo and his sons would see it this way. Now, there are 2 achievements which firmly belong to Perturabo that we really must mention when speaking on the man. The first of which was securing the traitor forces a route to Terra in such a way that the main siege forces could translate into the Sol system unmolested, and the second is his humbling of the Imperial 5th Legion during the Scouring, which has come to be known as the Iron Cage. The most infamous battle in all of Warhammer history, that is, the siege of the Imperial Palace on Terra, would not have taken place either as quickly or possibly at all, if not for Perturabo's efforts in capturing the Elysian Gate at Uranus and decimating the shipyards of Jupiter. In both cases, Perturabo exercised great tactical foresight as well as an understanding of the various forces at his command, whether they be traitor legionary or corrupted independent vessels. Perturabo would counter both the known standing defences of Uranus and Jupiter, as well as the defences and emplacements Dawn had constructed as part of his second and third sphere defence systems. It is worth noting that as Abaddon observed Perturabo at work during the Siege of Terra, he would note that not only did the Primarch for once seem happy, but for all the data Perturabo was absorbing and myriad assets he was directly controlling, Abaddon would appreciate what a truly unmatched genius Perturabo was. Perturabo's worth, lost among the many battlefronts and various crusade hosts bearing the imperial truth throughout the galaxy, would come to the fore in the most decisive battle in over 30,000 years of bloody human history. The Siege of Terra was once referred to as the greatest hell we have ever known, considering this remark was made by the erstwhile primary iterator Kirill Sinderman, a man who witnessed many atrocities and was present on Horus' flagship at the outset of his betrayal. This in itself speaks volumes. Horus, by this time, the most corrupted he had ever been, would ensure Perturabo's great mind was put to work in overtime to address the issue of the palace defences. Perturabo's years of unrecognised achievements and begrudging acceptance of fortifying orders were over, and it was his time to show all mankind what his great intellect was truly capable of in a game of wits, feints, and decisive action against his arch nemesis, Rogal Dawn. Though Perturabo's first and primary goal would be the taking of the Imperial Palace as per the War Master's command, Perturabo would also take the time and care in relishing the gradual dismantling of his brother's carefully coordinated defences. To the Lord of Iron, the immovable object that was the Lord of the Imperial Fist would succumb to the unstoppable force that was he, Perturabo. Though we know the siege was ultimately a defeat for the traitor legions, Perturabo had wholly withdrawn his forces from the war effort prior to it being considered as much. This is because Horus, in his desperate need to kill the Emperor and claim the Imperium for himself, had employed all manner of untested assets, chief among them the use of sorcery and the summoning of foul demons. These untried and loathsome ways of doing war were not looked upon kindly by the likes of Perturabo or Abaddon. Whilst the divisions between Brother Primarch and Legion became more obvious, so too did Horus's want to rely on warp-fueled power. Perturabo would despair that this great and historic battle was turning furthermore away from the purity of legionary warfare, his own brothers too corrupted and changed by the powers they now paid homage to. They did not care for the martial pride or honour involved in such an undertaking. Perturabo's iron will was sapped completely when his brother Horus would order him to spread his legionaries throughout the various points of the battle line, and for the Lord of Iron to resign power to Mortarion. Again, he would be used and discarded so openly by those he had trusted. In turn, Perturabo could just not abide. He would leave the Siege of Terra with his legion, content to leave his brothers with the ever-demanding effort this monumental siege called upon. In regards to Perturabo's second major achievement in our eyes, this was achieved in the years following the traitor legion's withdrawal towards the Eye. This time of revenge and bloodshed would forever be referred to as the Scouring. Loyalist legionaries and Primarchs would ignite a new crusade as such, expunging traitorous armies and worlds with a zeal born of surviving through the worst betrayal. On the world of Sebastus IV, Perturabo would once again attempt to goad his brother Rogal Dawn into a battle of genius and grit. In an effort once and for all to humble his brother Rogal, Perturabo and his legion of icy killers had created the perfect kill zone, a metaphorical sword on which Rogal Dawn would throw his legion. It can easily be said the soaring levels of bitterness and hatred which drove the Iron Warriors during the era throughout the Horus Heresy and Scouring was matched only in the Imperial Fist's own reserves of stubbornness and hatred for their traitorous kin. Perturabo knew that were he to challenge Rogal to a rematch, his brother would surely accept. Rogal Dorn, having witnessed and endured Perturabo's predations on Terra during the siege, would not forego the opportunity to put an end to the existence of the Lord of Iron. Unfortunately for Rogal, now in the opposite position to that of the siege of Terra, his enemy was dug in and had the time previously to carefully plan their defences so as to exact a deadly toll upon the Imperial Fist attackers. After almost a month of hard-bitten trench warfare, a slow advance between kill zones, the proud chapter of the Imperial Fist was reduced to nothing more than a handful of companies. Thankfully, for the continuation of this storied legion come chapter, Roboute Guilliman would come to the aid of his brother Rogal, no doubt saving his entire chapter from extinction. This was the worst loss the Imperial Fist would face in history, save for their annihilation at the hands of the Beast some 1400 years or so in the future. Considering Perturabo's accomplishments of delivering such a vast army directly into orbit over Terra, bypassing or eliminating the defences of the most heavily defended area of space within the entire Imperium, as well as proving at least the equal to Dawn in terms of siegecraft, there can be no more well-deserved score than a 3 for the Lord of Iron. Perturabo's hallmark traits of bitterness and resentment were not just present during times of strife, they also greatly affected the choices he made when not campaigning. In the novel Angel Exterminatus, we learn Perturabo has created genius works of engineering and architectural blueprints when Fulgrim discovers them in the Lord of Iron's hidden chambers. Perturabo, though, never acted on these imaginings, his own insecurities stopping him from sharing these creations with others. During the Great Crusade, the ability of Perturabo's legion to establish fortifications which doubled as reliable communication hubs, as well as means of resupply and security whilst the main fleets advanced, was priceless, as was his legion's ability to rise to victory on planes of battle that would have left other Primarchs and their legions baffled, if not defeated utterly. It is ironic then, and very much a clear statement of the inner turmoil that permeated the Lord of Iron, that he himself could not appreciate his own victories, and so would impress that trait upon his sons also. I truly believe that were Perturabo to appreciate his own hard-won campaigns, then others would have too. It does seem that with Perturabo's grim acceptance that nobody appreciated his efforts, nobody did. It is hard to congratulate or be happy for an achievement someone has done when they themselves do not see the positivity or greatness in their own feats. Considering this history, we will attribute Perturabo a 2 for negative acts or misdeeds. It is one thing that Perturabo would decry and criticise his orders to spread his legion throughout the multiple fronts, or to fortify the worlds others had conquered. However, the saving grace for the Lord of Iron is that, whinge as he may, he still did follow orders. By way of character, we can easily realise that Perturabo's overbearing attributes of bitterness and paranoia were of his own doing. These traits would put him at odds with his brothers, which is a shame, because were Perturabo and Rogal to form close bonds, then I truly believe between these two Primarchs and their legions, they would overshadow Roboute's dauntless few completely. Indeed, they would be the dauntless too, their strengths perfectly accentuating the others. We do see the overbearing demand Perturabo places on himself and his legion very early on in his ascension to Primarch, after his discovery and tutelage by the Emperor. As a Primarch, having only been introduced to your Gene Sons, to make your first official act the decimation of your own legion, that truly is a twisted, dark place to begin what should be a time of forming close and trusted bonds. Acts such as this would set the tone for Perturabo's own legion's psyche, knowing they would never be cared for by their own gene father in a way Sanguinius did his Blood Angels, or mentored in the way Horus did his legion. The Iron Warriors would follow Perturabo's own cursed mentality, whereby they too would grow bitter and resentful. One feature which is mentioned throughout the novels is Perturabo's ability to see the Eye of Terror, no matter where he is. I do wonder whether this curse did have a corrupting influence upon him, perhaps twisting what could be a noble Primarch into a bitter being. Regarding character, we must rate Perturabo a 1. His shortcomings were more or less of his own design, which is quite tragic, but if anybody should have the ability to step back and observe their own behaviour and hold themselves accountable to their own thoughts and actions, then it should be a supernatural being crafted to lead humanity. This brings Perturabo's total score to a 6. Before we dive into our results and compare them to the last video, remember guys, if you find my videos entertaining or they teach you something new, please consider liking and subscribing, as it encourages YouTube to push the content we work so hard on out to others. As we see here, our recent scores in combination with those of part 1, the Primarchs Mortarion, Magnus and Leman Russ are all tied for worst Primarch currently, each with a score of 5, though we still do have 9 to go. Okay, comment below if you agree with this list so far. I know it will probably get the ire up of some die-hard fans of particular Primarchs, but honestly, I think that's a great thing. At the end of the day, Black Library have more often than not hit the nail on the head with painting such a diverse and deep setting full of interesting characters that we the fan base become very invested in. So yes, don't take it personally, but definitely be passionate about your likes and dislikes. And do remember, we are trying to be factual and logical as possible. You've only made it halfway through the list. In our next 2 videos, we'll continue considering and rating the rest of the Primarchs. However, they're going to have some stiff competition against those 3. If you did enjoy this take on the Primarchs, make sure you leave a like and share the video. Have a good one guys, take it easy.